Well, if you've been around motorcycles for any period of time, surely you've heard a bunch of myths and theories that get thrown out there when it comes to motorcycles. It's a really interesting topic because even people that have never swung a leg over a motorcycle, they still tend to have really strong opinions about them. And so today we're going to cover quite a few of them. You've probably heard some of them, maybe some of them you haven't heard, but regardless, I'd love to hear your opinion, man. What is maybe the dumbest thing you've ever heard somebody say, whether they rode a motorcycle or not, about either us or even the motorcycles themselves? Love to hear and read some of those comments down below. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Well, this first one is an absolute beauty, and I'm sure you've all heard it at some point. Man, I'd love to ride a motorcycle, but not in this town. It's kind of interesting that some people think there's like this maybe safe haven or like heavenly type of place on earth that you can ride where no motorcycle crashes exist, and everything is like super safe and it's euphoric, and there's no speed limit, and everybody's like just riding, and there's no crashes, there's no cars pulling out in front of you, all this kind of stuff. And yet no place like that exists in the United States, nowhere in the world, to be totally honest with you. Motorcycle accidents by zip code will vary, but just because you go from one zip code to the next or one city to the next doesn't mean you're going to be any safer in that town. Sure, you might have less traffic and things like that, and there's going to be higher congestion areas. So I understand where they're going with this. Distracted driving and all of this happens everywhere. Now, it's true that 60% of motorcycle accidents will happen in urban areas, but the majority of accidents where somebody loses their life is actually in rural areas because you have less hospitals, typically higher speeds, less lighting at night. So no matter where you go, the chances, of course, when you swing a leg over a motorcycle, they're going to increase if you're involved in an accident. I think one study found that 70% of accidents where a rider will lose his life is within 10 miles of your home. So these are going to be on very familiar roads, typically, because on unfamiliar roads, you're normally going to show a little bit more caution. You got to think, if you're doing this every single day, right, the chances may go up a little bit, but also your chances of paying less attention to what's going on are going to increase. You get more comfortable typically the longer that you do it. And I think that might be one of the problems too. We get a little bit comfortable in what we do. I think we all do that at some point, but on a motorcycle, like and kind of like you treated in the beginning where, one little mistake could cost me here, that tends to fade over time. So I think it's always a good reminder that, hey, I've been riding for a while, no accidents, things like that. This is the time when I need to go to an MSF or to a riding academy, or go train with somebody that actually knows what they're doing. I think it's a good reminder to all of us as well that, hey, these things do happen, but a lot of that is more in your control than in other people's. Distracted driving is real, and that is a big issue for sure. But a lot of accidents do fall on the riders and them making mistakes or getting too comfortable, like I said before. So no matter what town you live in, if you want to commute back and forth to work, you want to ride a motorcycle, you're taking pretty much about as much risk as everybody else is, even in bigger cities and people that live out in the country. Now, here's one that I love because there's some truth to it, but overall it is absolutely not true. And that is that motorcycling as a whole is crumbling, or it's dying. When you look at the average rider now compared to the 80s, the 80s, it was like average age of 20 something. Now it's like into their 50s. When you see Harley Davidson, specifically in the United States, and how their sales continue to drop and drop and drop. I don't know what sales are down to, 25, 30%, maybe 40%. That's what some people say over the past couple of decades. When you see dealerships closing consistently, especially Harley Davidson, you start to think, man, this is really going downhill quick. And while Harley has its battles, Indian has its battles, they all have their battles they have to kind of push through. It's not like this is the first time it's ever happened, right? There was a bunch of doom and gloom back in the 80s, right? With Japanese motorcycles. Really, it's kind of started in the 70s, but really in the 80s, where, I've talked about this before, Harley had to step in and, appeal to President Reagan at the time and say, hey, we need some help here, right? They're crushing us. They're getting in cheaper motorcycles. motorcycles, right? So it wasn't like the motorcycling community back then was even crumbling. People were just going to cheaper, lighter motorcycles. That's kind of what they're doing now, right? You look at the Honda Grom, they've sold 750,000 of those motorcycles. It's insane. So the smaller bikes, electric bikes are catching on with some people. The adventure bikes are growing. I mean, they're projected to grow like 7% into the year 2030. Dual sports, of course, that has grown. So you have other segments. I think that's mainly what it comes down to, is the culture is shifting. When you look at other countries, like India sells, I don't know, 15 million bikes per year. And you look at these other countries where, motorcycling is the primary mode of transportation, it's absolutely booming. So yeah, it might be a uniquely US problem, and of course we don't want to see it crumble, but I think riders are just getting into different types of bikes now. There's so many different options out there as well, and people honestly want the best bang for their buck. If they can get an adventure bike, like let's just say Pan America, because I'm familiar with that bike, you can use that on road and off road. You get something like a Honda Grom, right? You can, rip that thing around your frickin' neighborhood. You can rip around town. You can commute on it. You can have a lot of fun on it. It's cheap. If you break it, if you drop it, whatever, you can easily fix it. Honda's one of those companies I always look to because they just have it, in my opinion, they have it figured out to sell more motorcycles, get more people on two wheels. Like I said, this is a unique US problem, but the culture's just shifting. It's for sure not dying. Now here's another interesting one, that sport bikes are more dangerous than cruisers. Again, there's a little bit of truth here. So people kind of take that truth and they spread it out as thin as possible, and that's exactly what happens here. Are guys on sport bikes more likely to be involved in a crash, even one where they unfortunately lose their life? Yes, about 40% of those accidents that involve a rider losing their life is on some kind of a sport bike, compared to 22% of cruiser riders. But here's the thing, sport bikes are going to generally bring in a younger crowd, right? Where you might have an average age of 20 to 25 on sport bikes. Guys on Harleys and Indians, they're averaging like, 45 to 50 plus. And there's reasons for this, of course. Sport bikes typically are going to be a little bit cheaper. Harleys, they're just more expensive, right? So you have two different segments of riders in different stages of their lives that, obviously can afford different things. But also when you're under the age of 25, we all have thought at some point we're invisible, right? We can absolutely do anything and you're going to, pull right through this thing. So you're going to be more likely to speed when you're younger, doing wheelies, doing stunts, things like that. Again, this is no judgment. I was there, I did it, I understand. And that in and of itself is going to lead to an increase in some of these accidents that unfortunately, young people lose their lives on bikes. Hence the reason you're going to be paying more for that single $10,000 sport bike when you're 20 compared to the guy that has multiple different bikes. He's going to be paying a heck of a lot less because you're just more prone to speeding and everything else that we talked about. The older you get, start a family, you start to realize, okay, I got to take it a little bit easier, and then, other things come into the mix and you tend to chill out a little bit the older that you get. The fact of the matter is, a sport bike or a cruiser going 80 miles an hour down the highway that runs into a car, you're statistically going to have about the same chance of suffering some type of injury or worse. So it's not the bike, it's just the type of people that gravitate towards those bikes. Here's one that absolutely is a myth, but it depends on how you actually read it. Car drivers are always to blame. Now, according to the Hurt Report, which is the most detailed motorcycle crash study ever conducted, about 2/3 of multi-vehicle crashes involving motorcyclists, the car driver was at fault. So you'd say, well, kind of case closed. But to say that car drivers are always to blame is a little disingenuous, considering there's still 1/3 of these multi-vehicle crashes where the motorcyclist was actually found to be at fault. Now look, I'm going to side with motorcyclists most of the time. And, there's reasoning behind this, of course. The fact that we are more vulnerable, the fact that so many cars pull out left in front of you, distracted driving, cell phones, you are in a big insulated aluminum body, steel body vehicle, and we are not, tends to push a lot of the blame onto car drivers. And I absolutely agree. There are a lot of bad and a lot of distracted drivers out there. We all see it pretty much every single day. But I can't tell you the countless videos I've seen on different various social media sites where a motorcyclist is actually doing something stupid and a car driver doesn't see them because maybe the motorcyclist was going double the speed limit or whatever the case was. They end up hitting them and the motorcyclist is absolutely furious. They end up breaking a mirror or, just going off the hinges or whatever the case. Again, I understand it and I get where this myth comes from, because when you say that 2/3 of these accidents are the car driver's fault, well, yeah, the vast majority of them are, but not every car driver is to blame for a lot of these accidents. Roughly 40% of the time when a motorcyclist loses their life, it's in a single vehicle crash inside of, going through a corner. Speeding, alcohol, inexperience, all of these things play a part. Sometimes just being young and you want to have fun and you're pushing the limits, sometimes this is the blame too. So while it seems like we're being targeted a lot of the times by car drivers and all this kind of stuff, at the end of the day, my biggest thing, I don't remember where I heard this from, but I'd love to give them credit because it's not an original idea by any means. If you put the safety of yourself in the hands of others, they're always going to let you down. There are absolutely things that you can do a lot more that's in your control than you may think when it comes to how safe or even how dangerous you may be on your own motorcycle. Things will happen, close calls will happen. It's unfortunate, but if you're looking for things before they happen, if you're driving defensively, all this kind of stuff, there's a lot that plays into it. And some more things that we'll probably cover in this video, then you can absolutely avoid most of these close calls and what would be crashes if you're actually paying attention to what's going on. And the last one we're going to talk about in this video is that, man, I have ridden for a season and I have outgrown my beginner motorcycle. Now, of course, pressure from social media or pressure from friends or, the common saying is, man, it's time to graduate to a bigger, real motorcycle. That pressure is real for a lot of people. And it was for me personally too. But the reality is, a lot of these smaller bikes like the Honda Grom, like the Ninja 400, the Rebel 500, whichever small bike you want to talk about, are almost always the best-selling motorcycles. Now, yeah, they're more affordable, so more people tend to gravitate towards those bikes. But there's some big bikes, Street Glide and others, that are consistently topping sales in the United States. But these small beginner, so-called beginner bikes aren't just sold to beginners, right? Even experienced riders like them because they're really easy to handle, they're cheaper to fix if you need to. They're just a lot of fun to ride. Now there's limitations with small bikes, of course, right? Getting up to speed is going to be a little bit more of a challenge. But you can do it. If you're going on a road trip with friends, right? You might have to more strategically plan out where you guys are going to stop, maybe more frequent stops, but you can do it. Advancements in, luggage and being able to carry certain things on pretty much any bike out there have grown significantly. So you may not be able to carry as much as a, fully dressed, ultra limited or something like that, but you can still carry your gear, you can still go on longer road trips. You can do pretty much anything that the big bikes can do with a little bit more planning and determination, to be honest with you. But I would say, and I don't know that there's a statistic for this, probably not, but the vast majority of people that think they outgrow their motorcycles never reach the full potential of that bike. I know I didn't. I surely didn't with my first two bikes, which was a Ninja 500 and a Ninja 650. I upgraded to that 500 within like a month and a half, man. It was such a quick turnaround. Very kind of silly thinking. I was extremely young at the time. But even with my 883, right, I never reached the full potential of that motorcycle. I just thought, man, bigger is better, and I'm going bigger. It took a lot longer to have a smooth transition from the iron to the Street Glide than what I had even anticipated. That weight, slow speed handling, taller seat height, all these kind of things played into it at the time. And things that I thought were important back then, although very convenient, it's not like I necessarily needed all of that. Now, I'm not saying that you never have to upgrade, but remember, if you're going from a 400 to a 1000 cc leader bike, the only thing it's going to do right off the rip at least is not correct your mistakes, but it will magnify them. A smaller displacement bike is going to be 100% more forgiving. And actually, there are studies to back this up. The NHTSA found that you're more likely, 4 times more likely actually, to lose your life on a super sport bike than just a regular sport bike or a beginner motorcycle. Plus, you have things to worry about as far as depreciation values, insurance rates go up. So there's a lot more to take on than just upgrading the motorcycle. And trust me, I'm not saying that you should never upgrade, right? I think you should at some point, but only once you've mastered that motorcycle and you have a real confidence and understanding of how the motorcycle works, and then you can carry that to any freaking bike that you absolutely want. There you go. That's my opinion. Those are some motorcycle myths that people still believe. I'd love to get your opinion. What are some of the wildest myths that you've heard out there? Let me know down below. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. See you in the next one. And as always, holding down.